Welcome back, everybody. In today's video, we're going to be discussing Felton of Maryland. What are his strengths and weaknesses? How is he best utilized? How do we think his play translates to the NFL? And finally, what do we think we can expect from him in fantasy? Watch to the end of this video and you'll have a good idea. Felton is a little bit south of 6'1" and 186 pounds, and so as far as size goes, that's plenty adequate for us. Now, one thing to mention is he is a late declare, meaning he is not a true junior. Typically, we want to see an early declare for our wide receivers. There is a positive correlation between early declares and being successful at the NFL level, but it isn't the end-all be-all. Now, as far as his production, in his true freshman season, he only had 5 targets, catching all 5 of them for 51 yards and 0 touchdowns. Not exactly the freshman season we would hope to have from somebody like him, but he did step it up in a big way for sure in his sophomore season, at least comparatively. And so he had 23 receptions on 35 targets, 309 receiving yards, and 2 touchdowns. But then we really start to see the progressive growth here, right? In his true junior season, he had 48 receptions on 81 targets, 732 receiving yards, and 6 receiving touchdowns. But he really stepped it up in a big way this season. And so he had 96 receptions on 143 targets, 1,119 receiving yards, and 9 receiving touchdowns. Also, for the first time, posting a PFF receiving grade over 65.0 with a score of 80.2. Delving into some advanced stats here, among draft-eligible FBS wide receivers with at least 75 targets, that's a sample size of 82 receivers here, Felton ran 348 routes on the season, which was 91.8% of the team routes. That's solid participation. We'd hope it would be a little bit north of that, but it's not as if he was just, merely a role player, right? Now, as far as his deployment, this is just about perfect. We typically want our receivers to be versatile, but more so playing outside than inside, but nonetheless having the positional versatility to be in the slot or potentially as a Z or an X. And so we typically like these 70 to 30% slot to outside wide receiver percentages. And so for him specifically, he played 70.7% of the time out wide and 29.3% of the time in the slot this season. Taking a look at his yards per out run, his 2.32 is tied for 29th in the sample size, but it is important to understand that he's playing at Maryland, so the quarterback play isn't going to be that of some of these upper echelon schools for sure. Looking at his PFF receiving grade, is 80.2 is tied for 21st in the sample size. I definitely think that he's better than the 21st best receiver, but I do think that it's, at least PFF likes him. A lot of times their grades can be a little bit wonky depending on what we're looking at least in my opinion, and taking a look at the film as opposed to just, taking what they say at face value, right? Now, taking a look at his yak per reception, his 6.1 was tied for 26th. I will say he is better by far than the 26th best receiver after the catch. You'll see what when the grading comes, but I think that his missed tackles forced of 26, which is tied for 5th in the sample size, really goes to show how amazing and dynamic after the catch this guy is. Taking a look at his contested catch percentage, so his 38.9% is well below the 50 to 55% threshold that we typically want to see out of our receivers. And so he was 7 out of 18 on the season. I will say, in terms of deficiencies to his game, this is by far the worst one, is at the catch point at times. So it's a little bit of a mixture of just, not being as dominant in these contested catch situations when there's traffic, but he also does suffer from focus drops as well. But he definitely has things about his game that offset that for sure. Now, taking a look at his targets and targets per game, he had 143 on the season and 11.9 per game. That is elite volume. Take a look at his receptions and receptions per game. His 96 are great, and 8.0 per game is also elite. Taking a look at his yards and yards per game, his 1,119 is pretty good as well, and 93.3 a game we like as well. Taking a look at his touchdowns, his 9 are good for 0.75 a game and are solid as well. Now, taking a look at tie versus man and zone specifically, as well as in the slot and on screens, taking a look at his PFF grade versus man, his 71.1 is 53rd. I will say he is a quick separator against man coverage. I really don't understand how he's 53rd in the sample size, to be honest with you. I definitely think he's better than that. Now, his yards per out run versus man of 2.23 are 37th. And so his yards per out run isn't per se elite, but once again, quarterback play is a big factor here, in my opinion. Now, taking a look at his ability to beat zone, his PFF grade versus zone of 75.4 is 23rd in the sample size, along with his 2.26 yards per out run, which is tied for 32nd in the sample size. I will say I think he's reasonably good against both, and I don't think he's predominantly better at one than the other from what I saw in film, but I will say, I definitely think in terms of his ability to beat man and zone, I definitely think he's better than 53rd and 23rd in the class. Now, taking a look at his PFF grade on screens, his 86.8 score is 25th. Now, this is a sample size of 30 targets, so this is enough volume to really be able to say that PFF has enough to work with here to give him a grade. Is he 25th best? I think he's potentially a little bit better than that, but I think it's within reason for sure. There are some players that are absolutely dynamic in the screen game, but to be fair, he's very good there as well. Now, taking a look at his PFF grade in the slot, his 83.1 score is 19th in the sample size. I think this is where he can really feast, especially against the off coverage and not having to shred off physical press man coverage. I think that's one of the things we need to worry about with him, at least, you know, potentially capping his ceiling if he's not able to improve there, which there's no reason to think he won't, right? And as far as first downs caught, his 57 are tied for third in the sample size. This guy is a consistent chain moving wide receiver. So as far as the grading goes for Ty Felton, remember that he's a little bit under 6'1" and 186 pounds. He's a true senior out of Maryland. My evaluation of him is that I think he's worthy of a third round pick, but I definitely think that he could rise up draft boards after his impressive combine performance. Now, in terms of the comp, I think he's, a little bit taller Zay Flowers. So he's pretty fast, but he's more so a quick accelerator necessarily than a true burner in terms of his long speed. His acceleration and yak ability is quite impressive, especially in the screen game. And that does remind me of Zay Flowers, but once again, he's a little bit taller than Zay is. And I do think that he's going to be a menace in the short and intermediate areas of the field, with the ability to separate vertically on corner routes and post routes at the NFL level. In terms of his short route running, he separates quickly on drag routes and slants, and is going to be a menace in the screen game, and I definitely think that's going to be where he's most effective at the NFL level. But I also think that in his medium route running, he creates a solid amount of separation on digs, crossers, and out routes, and I definitely think that that's going to help him contribute immediately at the NFL level, and he definitely has a nice feel for the soft spots in zone and regularly finds those with ease. In terms of his deep route running, he didn't necessarily create a lot of separation on the go routes, but he definitely has the ability to separate on posts and corners. And so I definitely think that he's going to be more sudden once again than in terms of just having the burner speed to separate in a straight line. So I think that's how he's going to be able to win deep. As far as his double moves, I didn't see any in the sample size of selected games, but I definitely think that he has the athleticism to win on out and ups and post corners. So I do think that he's going to be able to expand his route tree there. And I do think that that's going to be effective for him at the NFL level. Now, as far as his releases go, he has devastating foot speed off the line of scrimmage, and it allows for easy separation on those slants and those drag routes. I did see a little bit of wasted movement left and right off the line of scrimmage that does allow cornerbacks to get back in the play and allows him to really neutralize his own separation that he's able to achieve. But I do think that against off coverage, he's going to dominate. But I would like to see more consistency with his ability to fight off press man coverage at the NFL level. And I definitely think that utilizing him in the Z or the slot is going to be more effective immediately if he's unable to combat press coverage at the NFL level. Now, as far as his speed goes, he doesn't really have that true burner speed, but I definitely think that he has enough speed to get it done, especially on those posts and those corners. Now, as far as his acceleration goes, he had the fourth fastest 10-yard split at the 40-yard dash and overall ran a 4.37, which is quite impressive. And more importantly, that does translate on the NFL field, so he's not going to be one of these combine warriors that's really slow on the actual field, whereas, in the underwear Olympics, they're incredibly fast. So that does help him out there. Now, in terms of his snap down, I think it's above average for sure, but it's a little bit inconsistent. Sometimes he has that immediate snap down ability, but sometimes it's a little bit of wasted movement when he's trying to stem downwards. So that is something that I think he could work on at the NFL level. Now, in terms of his agility, it's quite impressive. He's great in the open field at making people miss after the catch, and he has an array of juke moves and spin moves, as well as hezzy moves to help him out there. In terms of his change of direction, it's above average after the catch. Moving on to his hands, in terms of his catching, he had 12 drops on 264 career targets, but he does make some nice catches away from his frame, and he isn't a body catcher. So I do think that he could definitely stand to work on his concentration, but I don't think that his drops are such an issue that it's going to prevent him from seeing playing time. As far as his catch in traffic, it is quite low, and it progressively got worse with more volume. And so he has a career 38.5 contested catch rate, which is much below the 50 to 55% threshold that we typically want to see, as a baseline to be average at the NFL level at the catch point. So that is something that worries me. But the thing is, he's a good separator. So that is something, a trump card that he has, rather, to offset some of his catch point issues, specifically in contested catch situations. Now, in terms of his run after catch ability, it's one of the better in the class. He uses quick acceleration, agility, elusiveness to maximize yardage and has great spatial awareness in terms of the people around him and making them miss. He has multiple juke moves, spin moves, hezzy moves in order to maximize yardage after the catch, and I do think that he's one of the better yak guys in the class. In terms of his dog factor, he plays with no fear, is an aggressive playmaker over the middle of the field. Now, he isn't the most dominant at the catch point, but he does try to maximize yardage consistently and is quite effective at doing so. And I do think that he's going to be able to be deployed over the middle of the field quite effectively. Now, as far as the analytics go, he didn't have 1,000 yards until his true senior season, so we don't like that, and he has a late declare. But we did see progressive growth, and he's playing at Maryland, so the quarterback play isn't that of some of these other schools that have high-profile quarterbacks. In terms of his projected draft capital, per NFL Draft Buzz, he's projected to be a third-round pick. But like I said earlier, I definitely think that he could rise up draft boards with his incredible combine performance, plus the dynamic ability we see after the catch on film. Now, in terms of his XC and slot ability, I definitely think that he has the ability to be a vertical X. The initial get off the line of scrimmage helps him there, but once again, like I said, he doesn't really stack vertically on the go routes quite as well as I'd like to see, but once again, on the posts and the corners, he does separate. Now, in terms of being a Z, he has the get off the line of scrimmage as well as the yak ability on screens that I think is going to be devastating and is going to allow him to dominate on the perimeter. And then in the slot, I think that he's going to be able to excel against off coverage because he has very good foot speed off the line of scrimmage, separates quickly on those slant routes over the middle of the field, so that's going to be a huge advantage to him. And overall, if he can improve his ability to consistently beat press man coverage, I do think that he has absolute positional versatility. Now, as far as my worries and limitations go, will his issues at the catch point haunt him at the NFL level? Remember that he has a little bit north of 38% in terms of his career contested catch percentage, which got worse with volume from year to year. So that is going to be an issue for him potentially, but once again, he separates well, so I think that's going to be somewhat of a trump card, but if he was to fail at the NFL level, I think that would probably be the reason why. Now, where do we have Ty Felton ranked among his contemporaries in the 25 class, as well as the 24 class stacked on top of each other? Well, I have him along the likes of Trey Harris and Pat Bryant, and so I really think that the issues at the catch point, specifically his catching in general, the focus drops, and especially his catch in traffic, those, he averaged in the 30s in terms of his percentage for his career. Those two things, I think, really hurt his score here. I think he probably would have been in the good tier. He definitely would have been in the good tier of receiving prospects. Right around that Pearsall range, if he would have scored highly there. But nonetheless, I still think he's around company of wide receivers that I think can be successful at the NFL level. And so as far as this class is concerned, I definitely have Hunter as the only elite tier wide receiver. But then we have Jalen McMillan, Jalen Royals, and Luther Burden III. In the upper echelon of good receiving prospects from this season, we have Emeka Egbuka, Jack Besh, and Isaiah Bond. In the lower half of the good tier wide receivers in this year's class, we have Williams. And finally, in his tier, we have Trey Harris and Pat Bryant. Now, I'd rather have Ty Felton than some of these other guys because I think he's dynamic after the catch, and especially as far as fantasy is concerned here, being good after the catch, that can get you those 70-yard touchdowns on a slant. Whereas if you're one of these guys that, like Marvin Harrison, right? He's a very talented receiver, but, his 30-yard players are different than like Malik Neighbors, right? His 30-yard plays are generally, 25-yard catches where he just gets a little bit of yak. But Malik Neighbors can turn 5 yards into 30. And then as we saw, especially towards the latter half of the season, Malik Neighbors was getting these long touchdowns, especially after the catch. That one against Philadelphia where he bounced off the tackle and tightrope the sideline was just ridiculous. And then even that one against the Colts where he split the two defenders and then bursted up the sideline. Players like this and how I think Ty Felton is going to translate are my favorite types of receivers, guys that are dominant after the catch. And so remember that he's a little bit south of 6'1", 186 pounds. Now, he is a true senior. We do wish that he was an early declare, but I still think that he can translate at the NFL level for sure. My valuation, I think he's worthy of a third-round pick. And now my comparison, I think he's a taller Zay Flowers. I think he's going to dominate in the short and intermediate areas of the field. I do think that on some of these routes that aren't necessarily go routes down the field, he is going to be successful. But I really don't think he has the long speed deep down the field to consistently stack vertically and at least create a bunch of separation. And as far as my grade, I gave him a 74 out of 100. And I want to give a special shout out to my Patreon members. Thank you to Big Hunt, SP, Major Jack, and Infamy MTG. If you would like to become a member, I'm going to leave a link in the comment section. As far as what you'll gain, you'll get access to a private Discord server. I'm going to have a real life and fantasy football chat where we talk about real life NFL news. Any questions you might have will be answered in the real life NFL chat. And as far as the fantasy football chat, we'll talk about what's happening in the fantasy world. I'll give you team reviews, give you optimal roster construction based on your specific league settings, trades you can make to strengthen your roster, buying and selling points, specifically price points for various players based on your positions of need. I'll give you a special shout out, obviously, on all of these videos. You'll get early access to videos. You'll be part of private live streams that are not available to regular YouTube members. And you will also have the ability to suggest videos specifically for you on Patreon. I've already made one on Isaac Rendo as per request by one of my Patreon members. And so once again, if you would like to join, the link is going to be in the comment section. Thanks.